what would your first step be to finding the right mastermind group for you?
You've been in mastermind groups your entire life. You're just not even aware of it yet. If you've ever been in a study group so you could pass a test that you were kind of on the fence, am I going to do well? If you created a study group, you created a mastermind group. But you can be more intentional and conscious about using this in the future.
Cliff, what is a micro podcast and how can that help our business?
Well, I want to just say for the record, there are some new things that have just come out that they call micro podcasts that are not what I'm doing. What I actually term what my strategy is, and many people like yourself have called it micro podcasting, but I call it series versus, what is it? Yeah, series versus ongoing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the lab. Really exciting guest here today. Over 41 podcasts he's personally run and are still in syndication you can listen to today. Been in the business over 15 years. He's collaborated with everyone that you can think of and well known and affectionately known as the podcast Answer Man, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. Cliff, Ravenscraft, welcome to the show.
Mark, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Listen, the honor's all mine. And you know, this doesn't get talked about enough, but I have an immense amount of respect for someone that can be in an industry on their own, supporting a family for this long. You've just been doing it for a really long time. I appreciate you taking a minute to chat with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to share anything that I can that might help others along their journey.
Yeah, and I know that you are. Because listen, a lot of the After Hours entrepreneurs, we're here to create better content in less time. We're passionate about podcasting and creating great content. And we were chatting in Clubhouse the other day, which I'd like to talk about a little bit, but we were talking about micro podcasts, and I'm just getting right into it, guys and girls, ladies and germs, dogs and cats. We're getting right into it today. We're talking about micro podcasts, okay? And typically when I think of a podcast, I'm thinking about something that's been in syndication for years, that you're going to keep it going. You're always producing content week after week after week. You see micro podcasts as a different opportunity. Can you tell us a little bit about, Cliff, what is a micro podcast and how can that help our business?
Well, I want to just say for the record, there are some new things that have just come out that they call micro podcasts that are not what I'm doing.
Okay.
There are special platforms that are built for they call them micro podcasts, and they're one-off premium podcasts. They're built with certain tools for funnels and sales things and stuff like that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I actually term what my strategy is, and many people like yourself have called it micro podcasting, but I call it series versus, what is it? Yeah, series versus ongoing. Mm-hmm. So the idea here is that when I first started, my very first podcast was an ongoing podcast. It's like I plan on putting my stake in the ground. I'm going to build a brand around the weekly Lost podcast with Cliff and Stephanie about this TV show Lost. We did it for 6 years, and I think we ended up having 262 episodes or something like that. You can find it at lostpodcast.com. The archives are there. That was our first ever podcast. But then what happened was we had an entire audience in the tens of thousands that were listening to that show, never heard the name Cliff and Stephanie before. Very few people out in Northern Kentucky had ever heard our name. And now we have this massive audience all over the globe, and they're asking us questions related to personal things we're talking about in the show. And I started answering those questions, but I realized I'm getting the same questions over and over again. So I started launching other podcast shows. But again, still in my mind with this idea that a podcast is something that once I start it, I want to build a community around that brand as well, meaning that I want to be consistent, whether that's weekly, twice a month, once a month. There's still this idea that I'm going to be committed to this for the long haul. So my wife and I started other podcasts, and I started several solo shows like Family from the Heart, which we did it's still going more than a decade later. I did a show called Pursuing a Balanced Life. I launched a show called Podcast Answer Man. All of these shows were started with the intention that I am going to build a loyal brand and community around this passion, this niche, this topic. Now, that can only scale so far. But occasionally what happened, and this kind of happened to me by accident, understanding the real power of this, is that eventually those side projects, the Lost podcast, for example, well, after the show had 6 seasons, they ended the show. It didn't make sense for us to continue to talk about to do a podcast around a television show that's no longer airing. So we kind of just put that into the archive, shut that down, and went in some other directions. But we had done other television show podcasts like Grey's Anatomy fan podcast, Desperate Housewives fan podcast. Here's where it really got interesting. We started doing podcasts that we already knew were going to be limited run. So we started something called the Twilight Saga podcast. All the books were already out. We knew that movies were going to be made, but we knew there was going to be an end at some point, but it still was a lot of content. It was over a long period of time. But eventually we covered all of the books, we covered all of the movies, and then we went to the Hunger Games podcast. Now, those shows have not been produced for years. But Mark, there are people in the thousands who are discovering the Twilight Saga podcast today, 10 years later. And those people are going back and listening to every episode we ever created. They had never heard the name Cliff and Stephanie before, but they began to get to know us over the course of 80, 90, 100 episodes. By the end of it, they're fans of Cliff and Stephanie. Now they go searching out for our other podcasts because we cross-promoted them along the way. The biggest thing that I had going on is I had the Podcast Answer Man podcast. And of course, this was at one point my main business podcast. This is my professional brand, the Podcast Answer Man. This is where I staked my ground for my business brand. And the whole idea was that this audience could come to me every week. I'm going to answer your questions related to the technical aspects of podcasting. So it's a very niche, and I wanted to stay faithful to the heart of what they had come to expect as the audience of that podcast. So in 2012, the very early part of 2012, I hired my very first ever virtual assistant. I'd been in business for a couple years, never had an employee in my own business, but now I found this virtual assistant and my life changed massively. Oh my gosh, this is so freaking phenomenal. So I did I'm going to just guess about 5 episodes. So 5 weeks in a row, I talked about how my podcast production is changing as a result of the different ways that I'm implementing delegation of certain aspects of my production to my virtual assistant. Here are the software solutions that we're using. Here's how I'm able to share my Adobe license with this person. Here's how I'm, using Dropbox to share files. I'm sharing with you everything that I can as it relates to how I am using my virtual assistant as it relates to podcasting. Now, at this point, I'm still experiencing things that I have not talked about in Podcast Answer Man about how my personal life is improving and specifically the behind the scenes, bigger picture business stuff. All right, let me talk about how, accounting is changing, bookkeeping is changing. Let me talk about how, just all of this stuff, scheduling is changing and email. Oh my God. But that's not for the Podcast Answer Man audience. Those people say, Cliff, can you get back to talking about podcasting is what would happen if I went too far down the road. But I was still so passionate about this virtual assistant stuff that I'm like, you know what? I'm going to create a podcast called the Virtual Assistant Podcast. So I went to my virtual assistant who worked for a firm and I said, hey, I need you to get your CEO on the phone with me, schedule us a meeting. She goes, why? I said, I want to make a sales pitch. I want to see if she'll sponsor one of my podcasts. Oh, she's not going to want to do that. I said, listen, are you my virtual assistant? Yes. Is one of the things that you'll do for me is reach out and see if somebody could schedule a meeting with me? Yes. Could you at least try? Yes. Awesome. So she schedules the meeting. I get a 15-minute meeting with the CEO of this virtual assistant firm. And I said, listen, I'm getting ready to launch a podcast called the Virtual Assistant Podcast. I already own the domain, virtualassistantpodcast.com. I will be the #1 search result for anybody searching for a podcast related to virtual assistants. I'm going to create this podcast with or without you as my sponsor, but if you'd like, I'd be happy to offer you exclusive sponsorship to this podcast. And she said no. And I said, before you say no, let me tell you who else I'm going to reach out to about this sponsorship. And I said, just do a Google search for the name Cliff Ravenscraft. and see if anything comes up for you. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll just give you 24 hours before I move on to the next person. Well, she called me back an hour later and says, I'm in. How much does it cost? And she became the sponsor for the first 3 months. And I thought that would be great. About 3 months is about all I want to talk about virtual assistants. Well, it turns out that after 3 months, she begged me, will you please do 3 more months of episodes? And I said, yes. Then all of a sudden, she actually maxed out. She could not take on new clients. And as a result of my thing, she goes, can you do an episode or 2 or maybe 3 episodes on how to become a virtual assistant and then send them to my application link? And so not only did I become the #1 source of new clients for her business, I also became the #1 source of new virtual assistants to work for her business. So after 9 months, Mark, I got sick and tired of talking about virtual assistants. Like, okay, I've maxed out as much as I have any passion for this topic. I'm done. She goes, you can't stop. I said, try me. I said, our contract's run out. I'm done. She goes, Cliff, you have to continue. And I said, I won't. She goes, well, then I'd like to, will you sell us your podcast? And I said, sure. $150,000 cash. I need it within 30 days. And she says, okay, never mind. And I said, okay. And that was the end of it. So I say all of that to tell you this story, Mark, that there has not been a single episode of the Virtual Assistant podcast since December 2012. There are 38 episodes in that podcast. Today, in October 2021, there is always going to be approximately 300 human beings who have never heard my name before. This month alone, 300 new people will find that podcast, will listen to all 38 episodes, and will be a fan of Cliff Ravenscraft for the rest of their life. And that podcast today, more than a decade later, actually almost a decade later, it's not quite a decade yet, but almost a decade later, that show still generates between $150,000 to $200,000 in new sales every single year for me. And the way that I can tell you that is whenever somebody comes to me and I'm working with them through my mastermind groups or my one-on-one coaching or my other paid products and services that I have, I ask them this question: how did you first hear about me? And this is what a lot of those people say. Well, I was doing some research about virtual assistants, and I came across your virtual assistant podcast about 3 months ago. I then listened to all 38 episodes of your virtual assistant podcast. That changed my life. And then you started talking about Podcast Answer Man, but I couldn't find it. And then I realized, well, it forwarded over to what you now have as the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. So I guess you rebranded it somewhere. Well, anyway, I've been binge listening to your Cliff Ravenscraft Show podcast for about the last 8 or 9 weeks. And I keep hearing you talk about your mastermind group, and I'm ready to sign up. And then boom, cha-ching, 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 over and over again.
I mean, this is just an incredible strategy. You brought up so many great points, Cliff. And I just want to kind of reiterate a few and get a little bit of clarification on a few, right? Because I really am interested in this strategy. So one of the keys here is that, and one of the problems I think a lot of new podcasters have is they have the tendency to think that my show is for everybody. And they try to fit too many different topics inside of one show. So what you're doing is identifying, this is who I'm speaking to on this show. Now I have something else I want to talk about. I'm going to start another show. Okay. But again, historically, when I think of podcasting, I'm thinking of momentum. I'm building up momentum. I'm promoting all the time. But this show, the Virtual Assistant podcast, you haven't produced a show in nearly a decade. I guess this is what I'm getting at here. How do you promote multiple shows at once so that you can, because on social media, you only have 1, maybe 2 different places that you can reach new audience and push people different places. Like, are you marketing this old podcast, or are you just leveraging search? How are we getting people to actually find these old shows?
So the only time I've ever marketed the Virtual Assistant podcast was after the 5 episodes that I did on Podcast Answer Man back in 2012. I said, hey, if you want more information about virtual assistants, I'm launching an entire podcast on this. Only mention ever made, only marketing I've ever done, never made a single social media post about it. Not one.
So it's really about...
The only thing is... Those people who were interested from my original audience went immediately to subscribe to that, listen to all 38 episodes. And that was in the thousands. And those thousands, out of that, maybe 10% of those people shared it with everyone who's ever mentioned the phrase virtual assistant, said, you've got to check out Cliff Ravenscraft Virtual Assistant Podcast. That is still happening today. By the way, have you ever heard of Tiger King before?
I certainly have.
Did you watch Tiger King by any chance?
I did. Yes. The entire training.
Carol Baskin is one of the listeners who I actually had call in with a question about how she could use virtual assistants in her big cat rescue.
Unreal. Carol Baskin.
This is way before Tiger King.
Yeah.
But yeah, Carol Baskin is actually, her voice is in one of those 38 episodes.
Amazing. Okay.
That alone, once Tiger King came, that brought a whole new level of influx into that show.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean that Tiger King just took the nation by storm. One of the things I want to kind of clarify though, Cliff, is again this strategy, right? Because generally when I'm thinking I'm building a podcast, it's generally for the purpose of I want time freedom, I want to generate new sources of revenue. But when you're getting all of your income from a show like Podcast Answer Man, and you're putting in all this effort to produce, let's say you produce a Tiger King show, right? You and your wife, you watch Tiger King, you record a podcast. You're probably not generating a lot of income directly from the Tiger King podcast. And if someone's listening to a Tiger King show, they're probably not interested in Podcast Answer Man. How do you actually bring people from one show to another? Like, how do you combine all these efforts so that that time you're spending is actually productive?
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to say for the record, if I were concerned about the money, where it's all going to come in from, and I needed to be strategic about all that, I probably wouldn't just be doing entertainment-based podcasts. Okay. It wouldn't make a ton of sense. But one thing to know about me is all of the things where I started, podcasting for me has always started as a passion project. It started for me as a hobby, never needed podcasting to ever generate a single penny for me ever. Back in the day, I was a very successful insurance agent, didn't need the money. I then decided, oh, wait, I'd love to leave my career as an insurance agent and become something to be able to allow me to do this thing I love in the world, which is create lots of content, whether I make money or not. But I've got to find a way to get away from the day job so I can create my own hours. So I have time to create all this content when I want to without feeling guilty about it. Outlining, 6 hours a day at the insurance office, my next 7 podcast episodes. That wasn't going over too well internally. So I needed to leave that. But I did need to generate income. So I created Podcast Answer Man. And Podcast Answer Man was the place where that's where I generated income. Now, I will tell you that those entertainment-based podcasts, there were a couple of ways those were generating money from me. Ad sponsorships, advertising straight out, affiliate marketing mentions, so affiliate calls to actions. There were donations coming in voluntarily, and I created something called Premium Plus Membership, which was extra content for those who really loved that content. So there's lots of ways you can make money from all of that stuff. So it wasn't so much I was doing all of those entertainment-based shows so that people would come to my Podcast Answer Man podcast and ultimately hire me as their consultant. However, even with that, when you have a show that can grow an audience into the tens or hundreds of thousands, which entertainment podcasts can do, I'm not going to do that with the expectation that people are going to come over and hire me for my paid products and services in my business. But when you have, let's just say 60,000 people who listen to you every single week, which is what they did for the Lost podcast, though out of that, even if 2% of them might have an interest in what you do professionally and might be a possible client of yours, all you have to do is just drop a hint every now and then that hey, if you like this, you might want to check out my business podcast over at podcastanswerman.com. So I can do that every now and then. Now, with that being said, it makes sense that you can see how virtual assistant podcasts, that podcast alone is obviously going to attract people who would be more likely to be interested in my Podcast Answer Man. So whereas maybe 2 or 4 or 6% of my audience of unrelated entertainment-based podcast might be interested in my business, another ancillary brand or an ancillary niche. Anybody who's listening to the Virtual Assistant podcast probably is an online business owner. An entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Those are the people, and entrepreneurs could probably benefit from having a podcast. So that's why it was just a natural thing. And so I did not do a lot of cross promotion of the podcast Answer Man because I actually was getting paid incredibly well from my sponsor for that podcast. But when I shut it down, the last 3 episodes, I spent maybe 3 to 5 minutes talking about, hey, this is the third to last episode, and here's why you should subscribe to my main podcast. And then hey, here's the second to last episode. Next week's the final episode. You will not hear from me again in this podcast feed if you haven't done so already. And then, okay, so here you go. This is it. I've warned you. This is your last chance. If you ever want to hear my voice again, this is where you go. And I sent them all. And so with that, it's I'd say it's about 85, 90% of those who find Virtual Assistant podcast almost a decade later come over to my main business brand.
I just love that you brought this idea and this strategy to my table, Cliff, because I actually have an older show. It's called The Awesome Dad Show that people still listen to. I don't actively produce for The Awesome Dad Show anymore, but when I start hearing about these ideas, again, people are still finding it out of nowhere and listening to it. So the idea of maybe combining forces, leveraging different audiences, finding crossover seems really, really great.
2 or 3 ideas for you there, Mark. Number 1, go drop one brand new episode into the feed. One brand new episode, might be the first episode you've done in 3 years, doesn't matter. Just drop a brand new episode that is nothing more than saying, hey, if you're listening to this as a result of checking out the archives, I just want to let you know, here's what I would recommend that you follow next. Yeah. Second thing, if you're with a media host that allows media ad insertions, you can record a 30-second advertisement call to action to your main whatever it is and have that automatically inserted into the beginning, the middle, and or the end of all those old episodes. That just every single episode gets one. Right. And worst case scenario, if you don't have ad insertion, just go find 15 or 20 of your most popular episodes from that old feed, download or go get the original recordings, manually change the file to add a call to action at the beginning and at the end of those episodes, and replace those episodes with the new recordings.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this is gas. Definitely something to be doing. I love the idea about the dynamic ad insertions. I'm all about saving time. And listen, y'all, you can save your own time by going to cliffravenscraft.com and check out all the podcast and great stuff that Cliff is creating. Cliff, I want to shift just slightly. I still want to talk about podcasting, but I got to talk a little bit about Clubhouse. That's where we initially met. And I've heard people say that podcasting is dying, that Clubhouse, that Twitter Spaces, Fireside, social audio is here. What are your thoughts? Overrated, underrated, Clubhouse, social audio. Where's this all going?
Well, there's 2 separate questions. Clubhouse, social audio, underrated. The fact that podcast is dying, dude, you guys are crazy. Do you know, when I left my career in insurance to do podcasting full time, Michael W. Gohagan says, Cliff, podcasting is dead. You're making the biggest mistake in the world. And I'm like, you have no clue where podcasting is going. And of course, I think I might have seen something coming. So podcasting isn't going anywhere. I will tell you, when Clubhouse came out, global pandemic, people locked in, starved for social interaction with other human beings, it definitely ate into people's podcast consumption time. But here we are a year later, and I can tell you right now, I'd say 40 to 60% of the people who were on Clubhouse all day, every day, maybe they sign in once a week now. Yeah. So it definitely did not kill podcasting. It was just a white, bright, shiny object. But with that being said, there is a place for social audio, and it meets a need in the podcaster space, the content creator space, that podcasting alone can't do. It's a tool that can be implemented alongside and incorporated in podcasting. So I actually host rooms on Clubhouse, and I will get permission from people to record, and I record great content from Clubhouse rooms for my podcast. But then other shows, I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm still going to stay solo hosted, but I'm going to say, hey, if you'd like to have a chat with me about what I've talked about here today, I'm hosting a room on Clubhouse this Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern time.
I mean, I'm totally there with you. And there's a lot of really great recording tools that are coming out now for these platforms like Clubhouse. Even Clubhouse is now allowing you some clip recording inside the platform. So
my thought on that, definitely never rely on any of those platforms to record your audio for you. With Wisdom app, they automatically record and put it on your profile. That's perfectly fine. Let them record it. But record everything on your own end. I use a Rodecaster Pro, so I'm able to patch in via, the little dongle and go hardwired in. That way on my Rodecaster Pro, everything's recorded. My voice is going straight from my Heil into a uncompressed wave recording. I do not want to send my Heil PR40 into my Rodecaster Pro and then have them compress the heck out of my voice for their recording and then me use their recording and put that in a podcast feed. Never going to happen.
Yeah, no, I record through my Rodecaster Pro also. And I actually recorded a how-to video on YouTube on the topic, which again, we're coming back kind of to podcasting because that's really my passion. But I started on YouTube, Cliff, with the sole purpose of helping people. I kept answering the same question over and over and over again. I'm like, I'm just going to shoot YouTube videos. But I don't know, for whatever reason, it didn't strike me I should be creating podcasts about these topics I'm frequently getting questions on. It's a
should or could. But let me just say one thing that we didn't address before, because I know you kind of keep these to about 30 minutes, and I'm willing to stay as long as you want. But I do want to wrap up these mini series podcasts. That's what I would call it, a mini series, not necessarily a microcast, because that's getting its own terminology. But this mini series idea, I want to just point out that my point moving forward is I do intend to continue to create podcasts specifically for this purpose. Everything that I've told you so far, everything happened organically, naturally, and I just began to see the benefits of all of these people coming from all of this different content that I've created in the world without any strategic plan. I'd love to tell you I was a super genius that came up with all of this. All I did was I just couldn't stop talking. I don't know if you can tell I like to talk, I like to hear my voice, I like to tell the world about what I'm learning, all of this stuff. So I just created all this different content and I benefited. But now that I understand it, I want to make a point. You do not need 38 episodes. So for example, I'm creating a podcast, just launched it a couple days ago. It's called Upgrade Your Peer Group, The Power of the Mastermind. And the idea is that the quality of your life is going to be determined by the expectations of your peer group. And if you want to change the quality of your life, you're going to have to change or upgrade your peer group that you hang out with. And so that's the whole idea. Now, I may only ever do 10 episodes of this podcast. I may never ever, I could do 5 episodes of this podcast. As long as those 5 to 10 episodes are freaking phenomenal episodes, like 10 out of 10 quality, I never have to produce another single episode. And every single one of those 3, 5, or 10 episodes will have a very specific call to action about a product or service that I sell. And also with very much, hey, if you like this show, be sure to check out my regular show, the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, which is what Podcast Answer Man used to be.
Man, I'm just kind of overwhelmed with all this information. It's so good. And actually I have a question. It's almost like a personal, professional question. I have a client, because I'm starting, after I talked to you a couple of weeks ago in Clubhouse, I kind of, my brain's shifted from podcast being like a radio channel that you listen to, almost more so to like a book that you've written, right? It's like podcast is like the new book. And I also really like this idea of maybe only recording 10 or 15 episodes, because I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll be talking to someone and I say, send me over the resources, whatever. And they send me a book and I'm just like, it's too TMI, too much information, right? If I was to start talking to Cliff about, hey, I'm thinking about hiring a VA, what do I do? Cliff says, hey, I got 20 episodes here. Go check it out. It'll walk you through the whole process,
And that's the whole reason why I said that. If I can tell you right now, it's on my desired future project list for me to take those 38 episodes and to go in and find what are the 10 episodes that are really the heart of what most needs to be said there. Quite frankly, I created a lot of content in those 38 episodes that I would have never created had I not had a sponsor paying me money. So the idea is, what if I go out of those 38 episodes and find just the 10 that are absolute evergreen, the most important heart of the message, strip out all of the mentions of my sponsor, because that commitment's been made long time ago, strip out all sponsorship, record all new intros, all new outros with my calls to action that I'd want them to have today, only 10 episodes. Dude, if it was 10 episodes instead of 38, my results would be exponentially better.
No, I could see. I mean, I'm working with a client now, and he has a successful podcast that speaks to salespeople, but now he's trying to evolve his business to speak to sales leaders. And so we've been trying to figure out a way, how can we create a podcast that really speaks to the sales leaders without burdening our client with tons of new recording and scheduling he's not available to handle. So he sent me over a checklist he had written up. It's like a 25 different cheat sheet or checklist items that every VP of sales needs to be doing in order to evolve with what's happening in the market, right? And originally we were thinking, no, we're just going to do this in perpetuity. But then once I spoke to you, I was like, maybe we switch it up. Let's make a checklist that supplements the podcast and a podcast that supplements a checklist. And then we got a show,
Yeah. And then the other thing is when you think about people who have email lists, you can occasionally create a sequence of emails that promote, hey, if you want to go really in depth, I have a 10 episode series. It's an audio book, if you will, with 10 chapters available for free via podcast right here. Oof. Now that's a much greater call to action that people are going to be interested in than, hey, I have an ongoing podcast that I've been doing for the last 3 years with 230 episodes.
Oh, way better. If you say, hey, here's your problem, here's 10 episodes, there's the solution. I'm way more invested than find episode 10 or out of 150 or 200.
Yeah, and just imagine, it's like, listen, 3 episodes is all. There's a podcast. It only has 3 episodes. It's got everything you need.
For everyone on YouTube, they can see me shifting through my seat and kind of thinking and taking tons of notes here because this is just gold, gold, gold. And Cliff, I know we're running a little short on time, but I've also learned that when you have an expert like Cliff in your on your phone, you talk to him. Cliff, I want to pick your brain just a little bit more about the power of mastermind groups. I want to pick your brain a little bit more about this new show, Upgrade Your Peer Group. Upgrade Your Peer Group. It's a podcast you can listen to about masterminds. I listened to episode 1, which was excellent. I'm working on the others, so come on, stay with me here. I just want to ask you, why did you feel inspired to create a podcast specifically about masterminds?
Because it is the Mastermind Principle single-handedly is responsible, outside of my relationship with my creator and outside of my relationship with my wife. There's been nothing in my life that has been more, has contributed more to the success of everything I've ever attempted to do in my life than the Mastermind Principle and being involved in mastermind groups. Mastermind Principle being you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with? The Mastermind Principle simply states this: when 2 people come together in a spirit of perfect harmony and they agree that they will meld their 2 minds together to figure out how to achieve any desired outcome, those 2 people will accomplish more in 1 year than either one of them individually could ever even imagine accomplishing in an entire lifetime on their own. So the fact is that you've got this person over here. I have my own education. I have my experiences in life. I have my areas of expertise. I have my skills, my talents, my abilities. I have my resources. I have my network, and I have my influence. That's all limited. It doesn't matter how big any of that is. It's still limited to my experience. Yep. It's limited to my influence. But you bring over here Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income. Pat Flynn has his education. He's reading books that I'm not reading. I'm reading books he's not reading. He's got his influence, that he's got people in his audience that are not in my audience. I got people in my audience not in his audience. So he's got his resources. He's got his skills, talents, and abilities. So Pat Flynn and I joined forces in October 2010, and we began a mastermind group alliance called the Green Room Mastermind. And as a result of that, Pat Flynn and I have just like,
Right.
and we will both tell you, there are things we have done in our life. There's no way we would ever have been able to achieve what we are achieving today, what we are living today, had it not been for the conversations that have taken place in our weekly mastermind group meetings.
Well, I'll tell you this, the concept of masterminds has been on my radar for a while. A, because I need some accountability. It's hard as an after hours entrepreneur. You can get distracted by everything that's out there. But B, I also think for all the fathers out there, it's can sometimes be hard to connect with other like-minded individuals. And I don't want to exclude all the women out there. Obviously it's hard there too, but I find that, if I'm not working, I'm with my kids. And if I'm not with my kids, I'm with my wife. And so it's just not a lot of time to meet other people. So there is a question here, Cliff. If you're a guy like me, amazingly handsome and crazy intelligent, and obviously everyone loves him, I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but assuming you were looking for a good mastermind group, other than listen to the podcast, upgrade your peer group, Cliff, what would your first step be to finding the right mastermind group for you?
Well, I would encourage you. I mean, these with just the short amount of time, there are so many things that I would want to say. And that's why I created Upgrade Your Peer Group. So I can do that one question I want to do an entire episode on. I haven't done that episode yet, but how do I find the right mastermind group for me? My first mastermind group. By the way, you've already been in it. You've been in mastermind groups your entire life. You're just not even aware of it yet. If you've ever been in a study group so you could pass a test that you were kind of on the fence, am I going to do well? If you created a study group, you created a mastermind group, but you can be more intentional and conscious about using this in the future. And I want to talk. So the first step literally is to go ahead and subscribe to the Upgrade Your Peer Group podcast. There'll be at least 10 episodes of that show. Now, I do want to say that I actually have mastermind groups. I do paid facilitated mastermind groups. I have more than 30 years of experience facilitating mastermind groups. And I've been doing something called the Next Level Mastermind for business owners or people who, if you have a day job, we do accept people with a day job. But if you have a day job, you have to have a desire to build your own business and actually leave the day job within 12 to 18 months. Otherwise, you're not eligible for the mastermind group that I facilitate. So yeah, I just want to let you guys know. But all of that information is in the Upgrade Your Peer Group podcast at upgradeyourpeergroup.com, or just search for Upgrade Your Peer Group in your favorite podcast directory.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely have links below for all the ladies and gentlemen, dogs and cats that are looking for a great mastermind. I'm to be checking it out personally.
And I just want to say we do accept women in the Next Level Mastermind as well. So it's not just a bunch of old men hanging out, and all of us good-looking men. There have been plenty of women that have been in the Next Level Mastermind over the last 4 years.
Love it. Can't leave out our lovely ladies. I've had some rock star women on the After Hours Entrepreneur: Jasmine Starr, Hala Taha, Marissa Romero. The list goes on. And today we've been speaking with Cliff Ravenscraft, dropping knowledge bombs. Links below. Cliff, before I let you go, I just got a couple overrated, underrated questions for you. Don't want to push my luck here, but overrated, underrated. I just wanted to hear your opinion on this wisdom app. You're the fourth person I've heard talk about it. Is it worth time or no?
Overrated at this point.
Okay.
I think it'll be dead. I don't think anybody will use wisdom in 6 months to 12 months from now.
Okay. Bold prediction. We'll have to quote you on that. Yeah. And for podcast monetization, sponsorships, overrated or underrated?
Podcast sponsorship, underrated, absolutely. Okay. And undervalued. People are charging way too little for them. You should be getting $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 an episode.
Wow. We'll have to save that for another show, because today has been all about how to create these mini series podcasts, how to develop your mastermind. And Cliff, if you had 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, what would you say?
Join a mastermind group.
Wise words. Cliff, thank you so much, brother.
All right. See ya. Thanks.
Thanks for watching Mark Savant Media. Here, we're going to help you create a better content in less time and turn that attention into income. If you love this video, you're going to love these videos here. Click the one. Me and my team specially selected this just for you. Click the link. Check out the video. I'll catch you here next time on Mark Savant Media. Peace.